Be honest with yourself for a second. When you think of American motorsport dominance, you picture muscle, you picture noise, you picture homegrown heroes winning on home soil. And for one brief, glorious moment in 1966, America built a racing series specifically designed to make that happen. Unlimited engines, unlimited aerodynamics, the richest prize fund on Earth, and a calendar full of iconic American circuit. It was supposed to be America's playground. Then a small team of engineers from a British workshop, led by a quiet New Zealander with a limp, walked in and took the whole thing apart piece by piece, race by race, season by season, until the only thing America could do to stop them was reach for a rulebook they had promised would never exist. This is legacy engines, and I spend way too much time thinking about the moments in motorsport history where the underdog does not just win, they rewrite the entire script. If you are someone who loves digging into the engineering decisions, the human stories, and the sheer audacity behind the greatest racing dynasties ever built, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now, before we get into the numbers, before we get into the lap times and the prize money and the perfect seasons, I want you to sit with one statistic for a moment because it reframes everything that follows. Between 1967 and 1971, McLaren won 37 of the 43 Can-Am races held and claimed every single championship across that stretch. That is an 86% win rate across 5 full seasons of what was supposed to be the most wide-open, anything-goes racing series ever conceived. That is not dominance. That is occupation. And understanding how it happened means going back to the very beginning, back to the moment America looked at every other racing series on Earth and decided they were all thinking too small. Here is the thing about Can-Am. The Canadian-American Challenge Cup launched in 1966 under what were called Group 7 regulations, and I use the word regulations loosely because what they actually offered was closer to a suggestion. Unlimited engine capacity. Unrestricted aerodynamic. Any configuration you wanted as long as the car had 2 seats, covered wheels, and basic safety equipment. That was it. The organizers looked at Formula One with its technical committees, and its political wrangling, and its carefully managed power outputs, and they decided to go in exactly the opposite direction. They wanted monsters and they seeded the field with the biggest prize purses in road racing history. By 1967, the total season payout was north of $470,000 and climbing fast toward $1 million by the early 70s. Sports publications at the time were calling it the richest road racing series in the world, and they were not wrong. The calendar told you precisely who this thing was built for. Road America in Wisconsin, Bridgehampton on Long Island, Laguna Seca and Riverside in California, Motorsport and St. Jovite across the border in Canada. Big block engines, massive crowds, Hollywood glamour in the paddock, and film stars placing side bets on the outcome. Detroit's money was in. Texas oil money was in. The entire weight of American motorsport culture was pointed at this series and told to go win something. Now, you might be thinking that sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos, and you would be right. But here is what most people do not realize. Chaos does not reward the loudest or the richest or the most powerful. Chaos rewards discipline. Chaos rewards the team that turns up with a properly engineered, properly tested, properly prepared machine every single weekend while everyone else is still arguing about which engine to bolt in. And the first warning sign that something was badly wrong came before McLaren even won their first race. The 1966 champion was British. John Surtees, driving a Lola, took the inaugural title while the American teams were still finding their feet. The organizers should have read that as a signal. They did not. And McLaren, in that first season, won nothing. They finished second at St. Jovite, learned what they needed to learn, and went home to their modest British workshop to build something that would empty the continent's wallets for the next 5 years. Nobody was watching. Nobody was worried. Which is, of course, exactly how the best heists always begin. Now let me tell you about the man whose name went on the cars, because this story does not work without understanding Bruce McLaren, the human being, before you can understand McLaren, the institution. Bruce grew up in Auckland, New Zealand, and at 9 years old, he was diagnosed with a degenerative hip condition called Pert's disease. He spent the better part of 3 years in and out of hospital, during which his left leg stopped developing at the same rate as his right. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. Doctors told his family he might never be fully mobile. He became, at 22 years and 104 days old, the youngest Formula One Grand Prix winner in history, a record that stood for over 4 decades until Fernando Alonso broke it in 2003. Think about what that trajectory looks like. A child who is told his body will hold him back becoming the fastest human being on a racing circuit. There is something in that which explains every decision the team made afterward, because Bruce McLaren never once accepted the premise that the resources you start with define the ceiling you can reach. He learned his engineering trade inside the Cooper Works team, the same operation that had put Jack Brabham at the top of the world, and in 1963, while still driving for them, he founded his own outfit, Bruce McLaren Motor Racing. Not a vanity project, not a rich man's toy, a working engineer's team built on borrowed ambition and serious competence. Here is what made Bruce genuinely different from most racing drivers who try to build teams. He did not see himself as a driver who happened to run a team. He was an engineer first who also happened to be fast enough to drive the cars he designed. He would test in the morning, lie underneath the car in the afternoon adjusting what he had felt, and then be on the phone to suppliers in the evening. His people describe a man who treated racing as a series of engineering problems that happened to be solved at speed. And the mantra that emerged from that culture is one of my favorite things in all of motorsport history because it sounds so profoundly unambitious. Be there. Finish. Be competitive. In that order. Notice what is missing. Winning is not mentioned anywhere in it. The philosophy was that if you turn up to every race with a car that has been properly prepared and properly tested, winning becomes a natural consequence rather than a target you chase. Remember that quiet, boring, deeply unsexy little slogan, because it is about to walk into America's most extravagant racing series and take everything that was not nailed down. The car that executed that philosophy most completely was the McLaren M8B, and if you have never looked at photographs of it, go and do that now because it is simultaneously one of the most purposeful and most intimidating machines ever built for a racing circuit. Gordon Koppuk was the designer, and what he produced was not revolutionary. It was refined to a degree that made revolution unnecessary. An aluminum big block Chevrolet stretched to 430 cubic inches, producing around 630 horsepower. A Hewland gearbox, and a massive rear wing mounted on struts connected directly to the rear suspension uprights, meaning the downforce loaded straight onto the tires rather than compressing the springs and corrupting the handling. That last idea came originally from the American Chaparral team in Texas, borrowed openly and then executed with more precision than its inventors ever managed consistently. 2 race cars and a spare chassis. That was the entire M8B fleet. The whole perfect season of 1969, all 11 wins, came from a set of cars you could park in a double garage. And this is where it gets really interesting because 1969 was not just a dominant season. It was a statistically perfect season. 11 races, 11 McLaren victories, from the opener at Motorsport in June all the way to the finale in Texas in November. Nobody else won a single race. Bruce took 6 victories and Denny Hulme took 5, and in 8 of the 11 rounds the 2 works cars finished first and second. The American press, surrendering with as much grace as they could manage, took to calling the cars the Orange Batmobiles, which was equal parts affection and despair packed into 2 words. Now, you might be thinking at this point that once the championship was mathematically sealed, the 2 drivers probably settled into a comfortable arrangement and circulated home. That is not what happened. With total domination already guaranteed, Bruce and Denny still raced each other flat out to the final round. Bruce took the championship with 165 points. Denny finished with 160. 5 points separated them after a season in which the rest of America never saw the front end of either car. That competitive intensity between teammates, that refusal to treat the opponent as anything other than the opposition even when the opponent was sleeping in the next room in the motorhome, is a fingerprint of organizational culture. You cannot fake that for 11 consecutive weekends. The famous orange paint is worth talking about for a moment because the story behind it is so perfectly cynical that it almost reads as fiction. McLaren's Papaya Orange, one of the most recognizable liveries in the history of motorsport, was chosen by an American lawyer named Teddy Mayer, Bruce's business partner, for two specific reasons. First, it would show up brilliantly on the black and white television screens of the era, meaning viewers at home would always be able to identify the McLaren in a pack of cars. Second, in Mayer's own framing, it would fill the mirrors of the drivers ahead. The color made its Can-Am debut at Road America in September 1967, and only in the following spring did it spread to the team's Formula One program, which means the most famous livery in modern Grand Prix racing was invented as an American television weapon for an American audience. The British team was not just winning the races. They were winning the broadcast. They were winning the optics. They were winning every dimension of the competition simultaneously, and the American teams were bringing muscle to what was always going to be a chess match. The financial dimension of this story is the part that genuinely staggers people when they hear it for the first time, so stay with me here. In 1967 alone, Bruce and Denny between them split $165,000 in prize money, over a third of the entire season jackpot in that year. By the midpoint of 1971, Denny had accumulated $464,000 in Can-Am winnings and Bruce had collected $315,000, close to $800,000 between the two New Zealanders, with the total team earnings approaching $900,000 once other drivers were included. And McLaren was entirely open about where that money went. America's Richest Racing Series paid for McLaren's Formula One program. Every spectator who bought a ticket, every broadcaster who paid for rights, every sponsor who wanted their name associated with the glamour of Can-Am was, without understanding it, funding the team that would spend the next half-century tormenting Ferrari, Lotus, and everyone else who showed up at a Grand Prix thinking they might have a chance. But even that is not the most audacious part. McLaren was simultaneously selling customer versions of the very cars they were beating everyone else with. 14 customer M8Bs were sold at $15,000 each before production even began, all of them snapped up by the rivals McLaren would then beat into the asphalt every single weekend. They beat you on Sunday and invoiced you on Monday. They charged you for the privilege of being lapped. By 31 years old, the limping engineer from Auckland was reported to be worth $1 million, almost every cent of it drawn from American pockets in exchange for American humiliation delivered with impeccable manners and extraordinary professionalism. The Bruce and Denny Show, the American press called it eventually. Two names for a traveling circus that happened to be the best engineered racing operation on the continent. Now here is the fact that almost nobody who casually knows this story understands, and it genuinely reframes the entire narrative. The McLaren steamroller was not powered from England. In November 1969, the team incorporated a company called McLaren Engines on 8 Mile Road in Livonia, Michigan, sitting right on Detroit's doorstep. An ex-drag racer named George Bolthoff built those aluminum big-block Chevrolets there, developments of the same engine family as Chevrolet's own all-aluminum ZL1. The fuel injection was sorted by Knutson. The thunder inside the orange cars was American-built and American-fed from the first bolt to the last dyno pole. The chassis thinking, the aerodynamics, the organizational discipline, the testing philosophy, all of that came from the British workshop. But the horsepower came from America, prepared more carefully than any American team was preparing their own. Can-Am was not lost because American hardware was inferior. The Chevrolet V8 was the best engine in the series, and everybody ran it. America lost its own series because one small team simply did everything else better. The preparation, the testing cycles, the reliability protocols, and above all the institutional humility to treat every race as an engineering problem requiring a solution rather than a stage requiring a performance. And the resistance was not lazy either, because that is another myth worth puncturing. Jim Hall's Chaparral outfit from Texas was the most inventive constructor in American motorsport, and they threw everything they had at the orange cars. The 1969 Chaparral 2H was so radical and so difficult to drive that world champion John Surtees was hired specifically to tame it, hated every corner of the handling, and eventually walked away. A tiny underfunded operation called the T-22 built their car partly from titanium and could not afford a spare chassis, yet their driver Jackie Oliver still chased the McLarens home to second place 3 times during the season, including surviving a full airborne backflip at St. Jovite that had no business ending without a fatality. And in 1970, Jim Hall produced the most notorious racing car in the history of the series, the Chaparral 2J. 2 auxiliary fans driven by a separate snowmobile-style engine sucked the car onto the road surface through flexible plastic skirts, generating mechanical grip entirely independent of vehicle speed. Jackie Stewart drove it in testing. Vic Elford raced it. At its best it was qualifying 2 full seconds faster than anything else on the circuit, and 2 seconds over a lap is not an advantage, it is a different species. It never won because it kept breaking down in ways that a team with more resources might have solved. But it frightened the champions badly enough that McLaren led the official protest to have it banned, arguing the fans constituted movable aerodynamic devices and a potential debris hazard to other competitors. The SCCA agreed and the 2J was outlawed after a single season. And I want you to sit with that irony for a full moment, because it is one of the most perfectly hypocritical moments in motorsport regulatory history. The team that had thrived for 4 consecutive years specifically because Can-Am offered unlimited technical freedom went to the officials and argued that too much freedom was dangerous the moment an American competitor produced a better technical idea. Domination is defended with lawyers as well as lap times. Always has been. Then came the event that could have ended everything and instead revealed the full depth of what Bruce McLaren had actually built. On the 2nd of June, 1970, Bruce was testing the new M8B at Goodwood in West Sussex, the quiet circuit where the team did its development work away from the pressure of race weekends. On the Levant Straight, at around 170 miles per hour, the rear bodywork tore away from the car. The M8B spun off the circuit, struck a marshal's post, and Bruce McLaren died at 32 years old in a car with his own name on it, developing the machine that was supposed to defend everything he had spent his life building. What happened in the weeks after that defines the team more completely than any championship or any perfect season. Denny Hume was already injured, his hands burned in a methanol fire during practice for the Indianapolis 500. The team was leaderless and grieving and physically depleted. The Can-Am season opened barely 2 weeks after Bruce's death, and the team went anyway. Dan Gurney, America's own great constructor and driver, stepped into Bruce's seat and won the first 2 rounds before a sponsorship conflict forced his departure after 3 races. Peter Gethin replaced him and contributed another win. And Denny Hume, who the press had long called the bear for his undemonstrative, almost ferocious quiet competence, drove that entire summer with his burned hands, refused to let his grief or his pain dictate terms to his output, and won 6 races to claim the 1970 championship. Be there. Finish. Be competitive. The mantra did not bend even for death. The team also did not collapse afterward because Bruce had built it in his own image, meaning it was structured around engineering process and institutional knowledge rather than around a single personality. Teddy Mayer stepped into the management role, and the name on the factory door went forward. The Formula One championships followed. Indianapolis followed. Le Mans followed. Every trophy McLaren has lifted since June of 1970 carries a thread that connects it back to a man who built an organization so robust it survived losing the person it was named after. By 1971, the domination had become genuinely uncomfortable for everyone involved, including the team delivering it. Teddy Mayer, greeting the arrival of Jackie Stewart's new Lola entry with something approaching relief, told the press he was glad Stewart was there because the racing had been getting a little boring. The winning team was publicly requesting stronger competition. Jackie Stewart, at the absolute peak of his powers, a Formula One world champion in the year he won his second title, pushed as hard as any driver on Earth could push and extracted 2 Can-Am victories from the Lola that summer at St. Jovite and Mid-Ohio. Every other race still fell to McLaren. The championship went to Peter Revson, an heir to the Revlon Cosmetics fortune, a man whose middle name was literally Revlon, and whose family had withdrawn financial support when he chose racing over the family business. 5 wins from 10 races made him the first American champion of America's own series in its 6-year history. Look at that sentence carefully. It required 6 years and a British car, and the employment structure of a team built by a dead New Zealander before an American could win the Canadian-American Challenge Cup. And when Peter Revson finally did it, the papaya paint and the engineering philosophy behind it belonged entirely to the people who had been cleaning out the prize fund since 1967. McLaren was never actually out-engineered by an American team. The Can-Am dynasty ended in 1972 when Porsche arrived with the turbocharged 91710, developed under the direction of Roger Penske and producing somewhere in the region of 900 horsepower. Even that campaign needed misfortune to establish itself. Mark Donohue, the designated Porsche driver, was injured in testing when his rear bodywork failed at speed, a haunting echo of what had happened to Bruce 2 years earlier on the same Goodwood Straight. His stand-in George Falmer claimed the title and Porsche won 6 of 9 races. McLaren read the trajectory clearly, understood that the series was about to enter a horsepower arms race that had no logical ceiling, and made the rational decision. They packed up the M20, which was their final Can-Am entry, walked away from the series that had funded their entire Formula One operation, and focused everything on Grand Prix racing. In 1973, Donohue returned with the 91730, producing over 1,100 horsepower in race trim and reportedly closer to 1,500 with the boost dial at maximum, and won 6 of 8 races in a display of dominance that made even the Bruce and Denny years look contested by comparison. Then came the final twist, and by now you will recognize the pattern because it has appeared twice already in this story. For the 1974 season, the organizers introduced fuel consumption regulations. Officially, this was a response to the global oil crisis. Almost universally in the paddock, it was read as a device designed specifically to legislate the unbeatable Porsche out of the competition. It worked. Porsche and Penske read the room, understood that the rules would be shaped against whatever was winning, and walked away. The 1974 season managed 5 races before the remainder of the calendar was cancelled. Jackie Oliver's shadow collected a title that felt hollow even to the people celebrating it. And the series that had been built on the solemn promise of unlimited technical freedom died of rule changes. Killed, in the end, by exactly the instinct it had sworn to resist. The series that promised freedom gave it up the moment someone was winning too much. That is not unique to Can-Am. That is a human pattern as old as competition itself. The moment the rules favor you, they are the right rules. The moment they favor someone else, they are the wrong rules and something must be done. McLaren understood this instinctively, which is why they lobbied against the sucker car and why they left before the regulations turned against them. They were always one step ahead, not just on the circuit but in reading the room. And in all the years Can-Am ran, through all the horsepower and innovation and money and talent that followed, nobody ever equaled what the papaya cars produced in 1969. 11 races, 11 wins, 0 concessions, That season belongs to McLaren permanently and cannot be revised or revisited or matched by anything that came before or after it. One final footnote that feels almost too neat to be real. In March 2026 at the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance in Florida, one of the two M8Bs that actually raced in 1969 was awarded Best of Show honors in the sport category. On American soil, surrounded by American automotive history, more than half a century after the car it represents systematically emptied America's motorsport bank account, the judges pointed at the orange machine and said yes, that one, that is the finest thing here. Some cars stop winning eventually. The M8B apparently has not finished yet. So here is where we land. A series with no limits met a team with no weaknesses. Two New Zealanders, a lawyer with a paint chart and a television strategy, an engine shop hiding in suburban Detroit, and a slogan so aggressively boring that it somehow conquered an entire continent. Be there. Finish. Be competitive. America built the most extravagant playground in motorsport history, funded it with the biggest prize purses racing had ever seen, invited the world to come and compete, and for 5 straight years every toy in that playground belonged to somebody else. Tell me in the comments which Can-Am machine deserves its own deep dive video. The sucker car that frightened the champions into reaching for the rulebook. The titanium TI-22 that survived a full backflip and still nearly beat the best team on Earth. Or the 1,100 horsepower Porsche that finally ended the party before the organizers ended it for everyone. Your comments picked this video and they will pick the next one. If you are not subscribed yet, now would be a good time, because this series is just getting started.